أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. مذكورا الطعام على حب على الأرائك لا يرون فيها شمسا ولا زمهريرا ودانية عليهم ظلالها وذللت قطوفها تذليلا ويطاف عليهم بآنية من فضة وأكواب كانت قواريرا من فضة قدروها تقديرا ويسقون فيها كأسا كان مزاجها زنجبيلا عينا فيها تسمى سلسبيلا ويطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون إذا رأيتهم حسبتهم لؤلؤا منثورا وإذا رأيت ثم رأيت نعيما وملكا كبيرا عاليهم ثياب سندس خضر واستبرق وهلوا أساور من فضة وسقاهم ربهم شرابا طهورا إن هذا كان لكم جزاء وكان سعيكم مشكورا إنا نحن نزلنا عليك القرآن تنزيلا فاصبر لحكم ربك ولا تطع منهم آثما أو كفورا واذكر اسم ربك بكرة وأصيلا ومن الليل فاسجد لهم وسبحه ليلا طويلا إن هؤلاء يحبون الآجلة ويذرون وراءهم يوما ثقيلا نحن خلقناهم وشددنا أسرهم وإذا شئنا بدلنا أمثالهم تبديلا إن هذه تذكرة فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه سبيلا وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما يدخل من يشاء في رحمته والظالمين أعد لهم عذابا أليما صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك. ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته، وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته، وكم من عثار وقيته، وكم من مكروه دفعته، وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي، وقصرت بي أعمالي، وقعدت بي أغلالي، وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي، وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها، ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي، ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي، وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك، أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك. ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك، وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا، مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا، معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا نتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري، وارحم شدة ضري، وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، ورقة جلدي، ودقة عظمي. يا من بدا خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكرك، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت، أو تبعد من أدنيت، أو تشرد من آويت، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعا، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعا، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنا ما هكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب. وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكارم على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه، قليل مكثوه، يسير بقاؤه، قصير مدته، فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو، ولما منها أضج وأبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته؟ فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي، صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك. أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج اللاملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانا أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفا أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقا أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربا أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحدك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كانت لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملاها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدعا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح نسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة نمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكده، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك، وعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقلني عثرتي، واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة، فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء، وذكره شفاء، وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء، وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من أهله، وسلم تسليما كثيرا. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة.
Respected elders, dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum, Jami wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for marhumin listed on the screen, as well as all other marhumin. Surah Al-Mubarak al-Fatiha. Dua Shfa Maris is requested for all those who are in need here and elsewhere. Let us recite together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Ya Allah. Let us now invite Sayyid Hasan Rizvi to please come forward and recite tonight's majlis. Bar Muhammad wa al Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. We've been going through a short discussion on Dua Zamanul Ghaiba, which begins, Allahumma arifni nafsak. The first part, we were trying to figure out how we can gain more ma'rifah about Allah. And then as the dua continues, فَإِنَّكَ إِن لَمْ تُعَرِّفْنِي نَفْسَكَ لَمْ أَعْرِفْ رَسُولَكَ or لَمْ أَعْرِفْ نَبِيَّكَ. So the next part of it is, Allah, if you do not, or if I don't get the ma'rifat of you, then how could I understand your Nabi? How can I gain ma'rifah of your Rasul? So last week we started to slowly make this transition from the discussion about Tawheed and the ma'rifah of Tawheed to the ma'rifah and understanding, a deeper understanding of Nubuwah, Risala, prophethood, all of those things. What I want to talk about today, and for the next few sessions, our main focus will be on the topic of prophethood, Nubuwah, etc. And there'll be a few subtopics that we'll go through. So tonight, some of the things that we'll try to discuss are, firstly, what does Nubuwah itself actually mean? I mean, we translate it as prophethood, but what is the original essential meaning that the word Nabi or prophet comes from? And then the sort of main question that for some of you might be relevant and for some of you maybe not so much, it's, do we actually need prophets or not? Or why do we need prophets in that sense? And the reason we have to ask and answer that question is because whether we like it or not, whether we believe it or not, there are many individuals, whether Muslim or not, who don't feel that we need prophets. or usually it's not just that they don't feel need prophets, they don't need a system or institution of religion. I mean, that's the idea. Institutionalized religion has become under attack for many, many years. So we'll try to start that discussion tonight, inshallah ta'ala. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So firstly, let's talk about this idea, right? We talk about Nabiullah and Rasulullah, right? A prophet of God or a messenger of God. And later on, maybe next week, we'll talk about the difference between Nabi and Rasul, right? A prophet and a messenger, what that actually means. For now, I want to stick just with the word Nabi. Because normally, when we're talking about our fundamental belief system, our usul ad-din, right? As we say, the roots, the fundamentals for us as Muslims, we start with tawheed, right? The idea that everything is in unity with Allah, everything is a manifestation of God, right? That single unified reality, that's tawheed. And then, now normally we do go into adl, but if you look in the narrations, the traditional explanation is that there's three usul, right? It's tawheed, nubuwah, and ma'ad. That's the normal explanation for our usul al-din. It's three. Now the way that we've been taught is that it's tawheed, adl, nubuwah, imama, and then ma'ad or qiyamah. There's historical reasons why it's three has been turned into five. I'll leave that aside for now. And because we're not going to go through the discussion on the justice of God. We're going to go right to the discussion of nubuwah. And it makes sense, right? Right after you understand tawheed, the natural next step should be nubuwah. We don't say risala, we say nubuwah. And there's a reason for that. So this idea of nubuwah, we translate it as prophethood. So the word nubu or nabi means prophet or translated as prophet. So it comes from either the word nabu or naba. And there's two different meanings that scholars give as to the origins for it. One is that it comes from nubu, which means to be high, right? And that can be literally high or metaphysically high. So sometimes it can be used in the meaning of like something that's at a higher elevation, right? So the word nabu or nabi could be used for that meaning. So in that sense, when people use this meaning, they say Nabi is somebody who has a higher, more elevated position. So they are higher than us morally. They are higher than us, right, spiritually. In every single aspect of that word, they are higher and better than us. That's why they are called a Nabi. Other scholars say no. The word that it comes from, Nabi, the original word, actually talks about, if most of us know, I think Surah, Surah 67 is Mulk. I'm thinking of, 87 is Surah Naba, right? 87? Or is that Surah A'la? 78, I think, is Naba. Surah Naba means the great news, right? That's how usually they translate it. So Naba is related to the same word of Nabi. So there, it's about news or khabar or ikhbar, giving information or giving news to somebody. So they say Nabi comes from this word. And the original meaning has to deal with giving information, giving news, relaying stuff to somebody else who doesn't have that information. And they say that means then that a Nabi is somebody who has access to information that you and I don't have access to. In the same way, if you think about a journalist, the reason people will go to a real journalist is because they have certain sources or resources that you and I don't have access to. They are doing their due diligence and trying to find out information that is beneficial to our daily life. I mean, that's what a real journalist is supposed to do. What these kind of journalists do nowadays is a different thing. It's more of an entertainment industry at this point. But, back in the day, real journalists, their idea was that, in this country, this political issue, or what's going on domestically, or whatever it is, we'll get to the bottom of it for you because you don't have access. We'll get the information and we'll give you the truth. So a Nabi is somebody who says, look, you don't have access to those higher metaphysical planes. You don't have access to these higher levels of knowledge. I will go up there, I will talk to Allah, and I will bring down that information for you. So these are the two different meanings for what Nabi could mean. Either it's a person or personality who has a higher elevated state, or it's related to somebody who's bringing us naba, who's bringing us information that you and I don't have access to. So in this sense, they say, if it's a Nabi, it's about either his moral or spiritual superiority, or if it's somebody who's giving us news, they call him, he's the mukhbir, meaning somebody who's giving us khabar and giving us information that we don't have access to. So this was the first point I wanted to share with you, inshallah. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Of course, as I'm sure most of you have realized, it doesn't have to be either or. It It can be both, and more likely, that's what scholars would say. This word Nabi is taking a little bit from both sides. The reason the Prophet can give us information that we don't have access to is because he's high and he's elevated, right? That's the whole idea. Somebody who's an insider in that sense, who's a divine insider, if you want to put it like that. He has these conversations with God, gets information, and then brings it to us. The only reason he can bring us that information is because he's morally and spiritually superior. That's it. So they combine both of these sort of meanings. And this sort of segues into our second discussion of why exactly, why do we need prophets in the first place? Now, many of you may think, oh, it's very obvious, right? Okay, that's fine. But a lot of the discussions that are happening right now, especially in the West, and even amongst, because you might be thinking, yeah, atheists or people who are anti-religion individuals or anti-religion or anti-religious, they'll say, look, we don't need God, we don't need any prophet, we don't need any religion to tell us good and evil. We can figure that stuff out on our own. We have science, right? We have all these different disciplines. We can figure out what is right and wrong. What is right and wrong is very obvious. We don't need somebody who, came from hundreds or thousands of years ago, some old, outdated book to tell us what is right and wrong. If you and I didn't have religion, would we automatically think that stealing is good, or lying is good, or murder is good? I said, no. Nobody would think that or believe that. Even people who commit it know deep down that it's wrong, but they commit it because of some excuses or some fake rationalization that they've done, right? So generally speaking, anybody who's got, of sane mind, of sound mind, they would say these things are bad. I didn't need God to tell me that, and I definitely didn't need a prophet to tell me that. So what's the point of sending a prophet in the first place? This whole question comes about, for atheists at least, but even for Muslims too, because now this has crept into our own communities, amongst our youth, and even some elders too. I've had this conversation with elders. Even more so, as we'll find out, this idea or this doubt or this shak, this problem, has even entered into the mindset of certain preachers or speakers, sometimes young, sometimes old. Now, they're not going to say we don't need prophets. That's not the way that they frame their ideas. What they say instead is that, yes, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, say he was a great man, he was the epitome of morality, he was goodness and truth embodied and all these wonderful things, right? They big him up. Yeah, that was great. And he was great and everything he did was wonderful for 1400 years ago. And that Quran that he brought down was great for 1400 years ago. He was great for that time. Right now, not so much. So what he brought was for those Jahil Arabs, they needed to know because they were dumb, they didn't know anything, they were immoral. You and I, we don't need that anymore. They didn't have science. They didn't have modern psychology. They didn't have all these, fancy degrees in, Oxford University and all this other stuff. They didn't have it. We have it now. We've improved. We've progressed, or the word they like to use, we've evolved. We've evolved, so we don't need that. We can leave it behind. Yeah, they needed it. We don't need it anymore. Well, that's fine. So they're not going to say we don't need prophets, and they're not going to deny God. They're not going to deny Islam. They're not going to deny the personality of Rasulullah. But practically they are. Practically they're saying that God kind of wasted his time, or sent the prophets, na'udhu billah, just for that time, and you and I were kind of on our own right now. And they basically say what we need right now is our intellect, is science. That's all we need, and that's how we can make the decisions of right and wrong. So is that actually a viable solution? Can we use science or our own intellects, right? This intellect that has apparently progressed and evolved over all these years. Are we these superhumans right now that we can figure out every single thing that is right and wrong, and we are these superior moral creatures? We know how to make all the perfect decisions now in our societies. We can run perfect societies. Is that the claim? And is that the solution? Is that what's possible? So let's discuss that, inshallah. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So I want to start with this story. And I'm sure this has happened to maybe some of you as well. So, it just so happens, actually, this happened recently. So I have, family visiting from out of state. And, they brought some gifts for the kids. They brought these, laser tag set, right? So in each box, there was, I think, two things, right? So it was a gun and then the actual chess piece, right? The sensor. So they bought 2 boxes of that, so there's 4, so that all the kids can go and play together, right, at the house while they're here. So of course, thank you so much. It's a really nice, kind gift. And, I took a look at the box, and immediately a red flag went up for me. Said, there's going to be a problem right away. But I said, thank you for the gift. It's nice. Good intention, good niyat, as we say, right? Everything's about intentions. So I open it up. I'm looking inside, and all the kids are ready to play. But of course, they can't start playing. Why? Because there's something else you need to get those things started. And if you look in the box, it'll tell you very clearly. Batteries not included. The 3 most deadly words in all of the English language. And this is the same thing that happened to me when I was growing up too, right? I'd get presents when I was a kid, at a birthday party. I'd rip open the stuff. I think back I'm remembering, I don't know how old I was, maybe 10 or 11. I got, radio remote control car. I was interested, ready to play. I was excited, took it out of the box, wasn't working. Why? No batteries in the remote, no batteries in the car. Take a look at the box, batteries not included. It's terrible. All of that, that wonderful gift, the wonderful intention, all of that goes down the drain. Why? Because the gift is incomplete. The idea is if you want to give somebody a gift, if you want them to enjoy, you should give them everything they need to enjoy themselves, right? Like you buy somebody, let's say PS5, for example. If you get them no games and no controller, you're like, here you go. Nice gift, but what am I going to do with this? Right now, you're giving me extra work to go out and do this. So sometimes, the way we think about our lives, the way we think about things that we receive is that, look, we want the whole package. Somebody who understands our needs, understands what we want in our life, they should give us all the pieces, all the tools, all the parts necessary. The same thing goes for insan, for the human being, right? In order for us to thrive and survive here, if we believe that there is a creator, there is a God that made us, our assumption is that, okay, if God wants us to achieve some sort of goal and purpose, we should have all the tools necessary. Actually, even if you don't believe in God, then the idea is we should have all the tools we need to survive. So if you ask a scientist, or an atheist rather, they'll say through evolution, or through the mind, or the intellect, and through the pursuit of science, we have the tools necessary to figure out whatever we need to thrive as human beings, right? That's what they'll say. Everything we need is built into us so we can, survive as humans and we can grow in our societies. From a more religious perspective, they'll say, yes, the same thing. God has given us aql. He's given us, as some people translate it, not the best translation, but he gave us an intellect, or the ability to, rationalize things, the ability to have this higher consciousness and awareness. If we didn't have that, then it would just be like batteries not included, right? Us being here on this world would be incomplete. Because then we wouldn't have an ability to determine what is right, what is wrong, how to do what, to listen to what God wants. It would be impossible to do because we wouldn't have the tools necessary. So, okay, he gave us our bodies. He gave us an intellect. If he didn't do that, then he would be unjust and there'd be no point in worshiping him. But okay, he's given us these things. So this now, at least for religious people, is the first part of their argument. He said, look, God has already given us the tools that we need. Because he's already given us all of those things to determine right and wrong, meaning our intellect, given us the ability to determine through science what is right and wrong, that's all we need. Because the previous civilizations, like the Arabs and everybody else before that, right, for thousands and thousands of years, they didn't have perfected intellects. Their aqls were weak or deficient. The scientific endeavor was weak or deficient, so they didn't know, simple things. And you'll hear a lot of people trying to do their own tafsir of narrations like this too, right? I'm sure most of you have heard the famous narration that when, on a broken piece of glass, right, if there's like a chip there, you're not supposed to drink from it, right? Because they say there's a jinn there or something like that, right? And there's some narration like this. I didn't bring it with me, but I'm sure most of you have heard that growing up, right? That if there's a chip on a glass, do not, throw it away, do not use it because there's a jinn there. Or something like that. Or if, some najasat or something goes into a glass, there's a jinn that has possessed this thing or whatever, so throw it away. These kind of narrations. So you have some individuals, speakers, scholars, sometimes just lay individuals, say, look, the reason God, through the Prophet, had to explain this stuff about jinn and shaitan and all that stuff is because these guys didn't know that there was bacteria present and there were viruses and all these things. They didn't have the technology. So because they didn't have the technology, God had to talk about angels, he had to talk about jinn and shaitan and all these kind of made up fairy tales just to get people to understand what they had to do because they couldn't figure these things out. He had to make up these stories for their sake. But now we know better. We don't believe in jinn, we don't believe in angels, we don't believe in this ghaib, this metaphysical whatever stuff. We've got our science to tell us, yeah, there's bacteria that are going to harm us. That if we drink from this chipped glass, right, it'll actually harm us. We have science to tell us all these things. We don't need those stories anymore. So their idea is all these ahadith, you can ask these, progressive individuals, they'll have an explanation for all of them. They'll say, yeah, that was for those individuals because their intellects were not perfected. You and I should know better now, so we can understand because of science, because of our intellects, we know the real meaning, the real reason and the wisdom behind these narrations. This is their sort of ideology going in. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. They'll say the same thing about moral issues too, as I mentioned in the beginning, right? I don't need God to tell me that killing is a bad thing. I don't need a prophet to come and tell me, hey, don't bury your daughters in the ground. All of these things that you guys keep talking about, religion and your prophets and peak of morality and all this, yeah, that was for them. Those previous Arabs or other human civilizations, because they just couldn't understand that. They were stuck in darkness, and then the prophets, they were good. They helped bring them out of light. But we don't do those things anymore. We have perfected it on our own. And in fact, because they'll take it the next step forward, even the things that some of the actions of the prophets themselves, we now know that those are bad things too. Even though the prophets did them, and this is where their argument has a real problem now. Because if they want to say, yes, the prophets are the peak of morality, we would have to ask these individuals, right? Again, these Muslims who are saying these kind of, bringing these arguments. Look, if you're saying the prophet, meaning Rasulullah was the greatest human ever created, the most moral individual, then you have to say that he could have only done the most moral things possible throughout history. Meaning he could have never done anything wrong, nothing immoral. So they will claim that some of his actions that he did then, right now, we would say them as immoral. Like a typical, I'll give you a simple example. There's many ones, but think about polygamy. The Prophet married multiple individuals. Nowadays, you ask these progressive speakers, they'll say, no, this is immoral. We all know polygamy is bad. We have progressed beyond that. Or slavery. Say slavery, we all know, is clearly a bad thing. Everybody knows that. You don't need God to tell you. Well, here's the problem. Every single prophet, every single imam, multiple wives and slaves, multiple slaves. Now, what are you going to say? Oh, they treated their slaves really well. Is that the argument you're going to give? You're going to look like a fool in front of everybody, right? Whether it's non-Muslims or Muslims. I'm sure most of you wouldn't buy that argument nowadays. Oh, they treated their slaves really nicely. They treated all their wives nicely. In this day and age, people are going to, they'll destroy you with those arguments. So now that same sort of progressive, liberal, whatever individual is trying to hold this idea, the prophet's the greatest person ever. Say, okay, but you're also saying that we have progressed and we are now more moral than the people in the past. Meaning we know now slavery is bad, polygamy is bad. Okay, but your prophet that you said was the greatest person ever, he did that stuff. How can you hold these two ideas simultaneously? Don't you have some sort of cognitive dissonance happening right now? Isn't this a contradiction? Are you going to try to give some random excuse that, oh, back then it was okay, but it's not okay anymore? Okay, so you're saying then that the prophet did something that was morally good then, but now we know better than the prophet, and now we know it's immoral. Na'udhu billah. We all of a sudden have a higher perfected intellect than the prophet himself. Na'udhu billah. This is a problem in their argument. And I ask you, anybody who follows these speakers, ask them these questions. And we have to think about them ourselves. How can you reconcile these two ideas? And again, the other option then is to say, okay, like most of us probably, if we have traditional conservative beliefs, yes, Rasulullah was the greatest person ever to be created, the greatest human being, the greatest creation, the most moral individual, makarimul akhlaq, all that great stuff. Okay, polygamy, slavery, etc. How are you going to answer those questions when somebody questions you on this? Whether it's a Muslim or a non-Muslim. But if your kids are going to ask you, your grandkids will say, yeah, but nobody else, everybody says slavery is bad. Why would the Prophet keep slaves? Is this a bad thing? How are you going to answer that question? So for both the progressive, liberal, evolved intellect group and those who want to hold on to the traditional conservative understanding, this is a tough thing to reconcile. We have to really figure out what our sense of morality should be. How do we derive morality? Does it really come from science? Does it come from our intellect? Or does it come from a higher source? And this brings us to really trying to understand why we need prophets in the first place. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. let's assume for a second we go with this whole liberal, individualistic, rational, whatever, progressive, evolved argument. We don't need prophets anymore, we have evolved. Okay, so their argument then is that through science or through psychology, through our own intellects, we can figure out what is right and wrong. Okay, no problem. Let's put religion aside then. If that's what you're saying is the case, then my question then, or our question should be, how do you know, what is your ability to determine what is right and wrong? First question is, you're saying science can help you do that. Where in science does it say something can be right or wrong? Which branch of science is that? Here's a question. There is no branch of science. Science is known as an amoral discipline, meaning there is no question of right or wrong there. If you want to develop a virus that will, let's say, is specifically designed to kill all of mankind, nobody in science will tell you that, science won't tell you that it's good or bad. It's just scientific, it's experimentation, that's all it is. Science will, be involved in determining how to build an atomic bomb or a nuclear bomb. It won't tell you whether that's a good idea or not. Right? And they say this was Einstein's sort of dilemma afterwards. He wishes he never did something like that, but he did. And look at what it caused, right? The death of all these, Japanese, up until this date, the radiation poisoning, etc. But whatever it is, anything that science provides or helps discover or learns, science itself doesn't tell you whether that's right or wrong or good or bad. It'll never say that. If, as the Nazis did, for example, as they experimented on human beings, whereas people still do to this day, experimenting on animals, science can't tell you whether that's good or bad. It'll just tell you how to do it or what the results are. It's observation, empirical method, scientific method, that's it. It doesn't give you any answer or any method on telling you whether something is right or something is wrong. You might say, okay, forget science, then our intellects will do that. What do you mean intellect? What do you mean your aql will tell you whether something's right or wrong? How do you know that? And anytime somebody, gives you this idea, say, just keep asking the questions, how do you know that? So for example, think about, common issues nowadays. I'm trying to think. Right now, one of the hottest debated topics in terms of the public debate is critical race theory. Whether that should be taught in our schools or not, right? And it's being pushed by, liberals that this is the thing that should be used to teach history, using critical race theory. How are you going to determine if that's the right thing to do or not? Assuming everybody agrees on the same definition. How do you know whether that's right or wrong? Your intellect is going to tell you. What does that mean? What about other political issues? Is capital punishment right or wrong? If somebody is a murderer, should they be, killed for that crime? Many people now in the modern world, they say, no, capital punishment is inhumane, it's unjust. Others will argue, look, if somebody killed somebody else, even one person, intentionally, not accidental manslaughter or whatever, but intentionally, somebody goes out and murders somebody else. What logical argument can you tell me to say that it's illogical to murder murder, right? To put him on death row? What rational rules do you have to say that that's a good or a bad thing? The intellect doesn't have the ability to judge every right and wrong thing. And the problem is that people use the word aql or rational, whatever, in place of fitra. That's the problem. You and I have a moral compass that God gave us, definitely. But the aql, there is no way that we have a system devised to tell us what is right and wrong. And that is why the greatest example of showing us that science or pure intellect or rationalization cannot show us how to be moral individuals is because we just take a look at any society existing right now that claims that that's how you determine what is right and wrong. Look at this country. Every single thing is still debated to this day. Whether it's abortion, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's critical race theory, whatever topic you want to bring up, whether it's a Muslim or a non-Muslim, whether it's two different atheists, nobody can agree on these things. Whether they're talking about invading countries or not, whatever it is, nobody agrees on these. But they'll all talk about science, they'll all talk about using your brains and your rationality, all of this stuff. But the thing is, within the intellect or the brain itself, or science itself, or psychology itself, there is no way to completely, 100% tell you whether something is right or wrong. And this is the first clue, is that to show us that we need somebody at a higher plane of existence to have access to other information that you and I don't have readily, we don't have ready access to give us, okay, what is the best thing for us then? How do we know how to run a society? How do we know how to train our families? How do we know what is the best thing for our souls? This has to come from a different source, and this is where we say, if God has created us in the most perfect way, for guidance, as Allah says in the Quran, Inna alayna lal huda. Guidance is my job, God says. I'll take care of it. That's why He sends down a prophet amongst, from His own dargah, as we say, right, from that higher level. He sends down somebody to explain to us all these issues that you and I cannot figure out. Yes, you and I can figure out murder is bad. That doesn't make us a great individual. And I love people who, Muslims who say, I don't need to practice all your religious stuff. I'm still a good person. Like, look, religion is not here to make you a good person. Religion's here to make you a great person. You might be able to be a base level human being without religion, sure. Don't steal, don't lie, don't murder. What kind of human being is that? In the issues that really matter, and the things that are hotly debated, how to, train your kids, how to parent them, what foods to eat, how to guide ourselves in every single everyday issue, how to maintain a civil justice system, law, crime, punishment, politics, economics. All of these things, throughout history, they've always been hotly contested and debated. So nobody's been able to figure out, but religion, specifically Islam, no other religion, Islam has a system for all of these things to guide our lives in every single aspect. And we'll discuss this more because we're way over time. We'll discuss this more in our coming sessions. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay, let's move on to the quiz, inshallah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum to Just Me, Miraculous, Abu, Labayk Ya Imam, Mujahid J, UGNC, Plato, Specialist, Great Person, Sayyid, Hasan, Rizvi with an, I guess you're not copying my identity now because you're missing an I. So I guess that's good. Who just joined? What did I just miss? Just Mickey D? Let's wait for, I think, maybe 2 more, and then we'll get started. 1 more. U-M-M? Or I don't know what that means. Okay, 14. Rider. Okay, let's get started, inshallah. So, alaikum to everybody again. Taghut originally means to worship idols, to worship anything other than Allah, to go beyond the limits, or all of the above. What does the word taghut and what it comes from, what does it originally mean? Not the examples of it or not the instances of it, but what does it originally mean? What does it originally come from? 65% of you, Hasan got it right. It means going beyond the limits. So, for example, when water overflows or floods, you can use the word taghut for that as well. And the reason taghut is used for things is that when we worship things or associate partners with other than Allah, we've gone beyond our spiritual existential limits. Okay? The word Nabi comes from Naba or Nabu, which means what? To be high, elevated, to give news, A and B, or none of the above. So again, the word Nabi, which normally we translate as prophet, comes from Naba, or also, I didn't add here, but Nabu. But what are the original meanings or meaning of this word? What is it coming from? And just think about what the role of a Nabi is. So it was mixed over here, but it actually was A and B, right? I said I wrote Naba, but you don't have to do that. But yeah, the word Nabi is from both the idea of being high and elevated and superior, and somebody who gives news as well. Okay? Which of these shows us how to fully become better, more moral people? Science, psychology, religion, or all of the above? Think about what is the purpose of science, what's the method, what is the purpose and method of psychology, what is the purpose and method of religion, or of all of these, okay? All of these help us in fully becoming better moral people. Okay, this was the easy one. So 33% of you got a little confused. Science can't help you become a moral individual. There's nothing that will tell you that in science. And psychology, same thing, right? Psychology is just, it's just a separate discussion of what it actually studies. But all right, let's go with our last question. From which country does the piano originate? France, Italy, Germany, or Austria? I mean, any of them seem plausible. So when I was thinking about this, I got confused and I thought about famous composers, but it was incorrect. So minority of you got it right. It was actually Italy. Nobody said Germany, interestingly enough, but yeah, Italy. Yeah, that was a tricky one. Okay. Congratulations to Plato. Okay, the only one, 4 out of 4, 30 seconds. Hasan, welcome back, Plato. Good job. Yeah, and that was the hardest question, right? The country of origin for a piano. Hasan. Okay, so we will continue our topic about the idea of prophets and why we need them and how we define and obtain our sense of morality. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وطاعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبي بكم موقن بشراع ديني وخواتيم عملي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله.
السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي. طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوطهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواسي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر، والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا تسعة المأسومين من ذرية الحسين، علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا سيدي ومولاي صاحب العصر والزمان، سيدي الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا.